I'm Ava Laura.
And I'm Jessica.
And this is Black Women Leave America podcast, where we highlight holistic wellness, travel, mental health, and self-care through traveling outside of America to reconnect and rediscover who you are. It's time for us to leave any condition that disrupts our peace. Black Women Leave America opens your eyes and explores new ways of living, but more importantly, new ways of being. Because sometimes you have to leave in order to find yourself. Kind of figure out next steps into something else that I may want to do.
Absolutely. And one of the questions that I incorporate into some of my
Hey y'all, welcome to Black Women Leave America podcast, where sometimes you have to leave in order to find yourself. I'm your host, Ava Laura, and this is my co-host.
Almost messed that up, Jessica.
Hey, so we are excited. We have another edition, another amazing guest. Miss Nadia is going to be sharing her experience with us. And for some of you who are interested, you're like, oh my God, I really want to do this, but I'm scared. I don't know how to, travel abroad by myself, or, I have, all these obligations or whatever it is here. I think Nadia's story might resonate with you all. So we're going to let her talk about a little bit about herself and share how she got started. Nadia, how are you doing today?
I am great. Thank you for inviting me to join you all today. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and, and how you really got started traveling abroad, because it's a little different than some of the other stories we've heard.
Yeah, so I have, I had long been a traveler, and I would carve out time in my schedule in order to travel. And it was both domestic and international. It was part of my job for many, many years. And just being in different places and spaces has always been something that's intrigued me. So it all started out with a career break. And that's where I began a more formal and intentional exploration of the world, if you will, as opposed to doing it on vacation, which is what a lot of people do, and that's great. Exactly. But for me, it was the living piece that I really wanted to wrap myself in. I did have an opportunity in, I think it was 2015, where I was able to do a work assignment where I was based in Geneva. So I had a chance to live as an expat for a little bit, liked it a lot, and put it higher on my priority list in terms of dreams and things I would do if the stars aligned. So I started to get intentional around taking a career break, and I had seen other people do it. I thought it was really interesting when I saw people in the tech industry, or people I was mainly in the nonprofit sector throughout my career. So I saw other folks in the nonprofit sector, higher ed, were giving time to do research or to explore or to just step away. And, when you realize that you can use your imagination and start dreaming that, how do I make that happen in my life? I was able to let my mind go to that spot of imagination and think, what would it look like if I did? So I had some intentionality around it in that I planned, but I didn't plan too rigidly. I thought I was going to take maybe 6 months, maybe a year, and it ended up being a lot longer than that. And it's actually evolved into a lifestyle.
I love that. So for those who are asking, and I know you said you were in the nonprofit sector, what kind of work were you doing where you did get to go work abroad for your work?
Yeah, so it was a lot of organizations. So that people can kind of see it in their lens, I would consider it like a stretch assignment of sorts. So, when your employer has that opportunity, another division or another entity within the family of companies or the network of organizations, they will sometimes need people to take on a project. My situation was there was a colleague within this international network who had, in Europe, people get maternity leave and they can take often a year, if not more.
True.
It was a long-term maternity leave. And so they invited people from elsewhere to apply and take part in an assignment. So that was how it kind of came to pass. I applied on a whim and the stars aligned, and I was then able to do that assignment. So a lot of times people may think that it has to be, I have to take formal leave, or I have to leave my company or my organization in order to explore an international opportunity. And that's not necessarily the case. There may be something right in front of your face that you can explore with your supervisor or your mentor or whatever, and then, take that leap. When you
Yeah,
take the
thank you
leap,
for
that
sharing
often
that.
appears.
Yeah, I mean, we live in an international world now, so it's not just that box that we're in. So you're right. Your
Absolutely.
organization can have opportunities in other areas, and I'm glad that you shared that, because I think a lot of times we might not think of that. We think like we got to be drastic, all in or out. And so, that could be a good first step to, if there is an opportunity, let me check this out, try this out and see how I like it. And if I do, I can kind of figure out next steps into something else that I may want to do.
Absolutely. And one of the questions that I incorporate into some of my big decision making is the notion, for people who work in the human-centered design space, they use a lot of how might we questions. And so how might we, what would it look like if, how could I possibly? And I think one of the words that comes to mind for me so often is simply imagination. We get, as we get older, we don't play as much. We don't do some of those simplistic things that children do, and we don't approach things with childlike wonder. As a little girl, you think, oh, I'm going to be a president, I'm going to be a pilot, I'm going to be a teacher, and I'm going to be a ballet dancer. And no one, maybe we haven't seen it, but that's not to say it's impossible, right? But we, as children, thought and dreamt and used our imagination to think beyond what was the tangible. And that was something I really had to lean into when I thought, well, what would it look like if I did these things? Sometimes we talk ourselves out of it. Oh my gosh, it's going to be a hassle. I can't leave my house for that period of time. And, you come up with pathways to make it actually happen. And it begins to shift your approach in a lot of other areas too.
Yeah. No, I there's so much I could say about that. I say that all the time. Know when I'm talking to my clients, I'm always talking about like playing, like how often do you just play?
Yeah.
How often do you just do something just to have fun? And you're right. Most of us stop dreaming. I cannot tell you, the amount of people that I've worked with when I've asked them, well, what do you want to do with your life? You know what I mean? Like what makes you happy? What do you enjoy? And they're like, I don't even know.
Yeah.
And it's like after the kids, after the husband, after all these things, they've lost themselves. And now it's like, I don't even know who I am anymore. And I don't even know what I enjoy or what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so you're absolutely right. Just play, just have fun, just rediscover yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think definitely travel is certainly an amazing way to do that.
Yes. Yes. Especially, I think the caveat with the travel is that you also use it as an inspiration to look beyond. So, and oftentimes when it comes to travel, it's thinking differently and looking beyond the typical tourist experiences. Certainly you go to places, you go to London and you check the box, you go see these 4 different things, but go one layer deeper. And that's what I try to, that's where the play, that's where the wonder comes in as I've been exploring. I think back on some of the experiences I had and I'm just like, this is crazy. I can't believe I actually did this.
I love it. So 2014, you got that opportunity. And then how did you actually, because you were abroad for a while, but what did you do before you went abroad? And why did you even, like, how did that even come about that you made this sort of drastic change in your life?
That was my question. Like, were you, like, was it like put out there, or was it something that you like intentionally like were thinking and then you kind of manifested it and it was like, oh, well, here it is?
Yeah, you think in terms of the career break, or are you thinking back to
Yeah,
when I took the, okay, so as it came to
during
the career
COVID, yeah,
break,
when you really shifted everything.
yeah, it was, so it actually started with a conversation around finances.
Mm.
And I have a financial planner I worked with, and one of her questions to me was basically like, what's your dream? And then reverse engineered based on, okay, if this is your big, hairy, audacious goal, or if this is your dream, this is what it would take to make it happen. And so I think that's really the starting point. And I do believe you had mentioned the word manifestation, but I also think clarity is really important, as well as imagination, right? Because at that time, the idea of me actually saying, leave my job, put all my stuff in storage, and go bop around the world was so far-fetched. It was so just, I didn't have I had seen a couple of people doing it, but it wasn't something that any of us see on that regular of a basis. So yeah, it started with a dream and a conversation with like to consider how, well, okay, what would it take to make that dream come true? And you're like, what?
Wow. So I think Jessica's question is good. Like, so did you actually plan it and say, okay, I'm going to leave my job and I'm going to travel here and I'm going to do this? Or was some of it things just kind of happen and you just went with the flow? You were already headed in that direction and you just kind of kept going.
Yeah. So I would say I did plan. I put together enough of a framework.
Nice.
So the biggest concern that people have, and this is one of the questions that I think most people who are nomadic or doing long-term travel will encounter, which is the two questions I get most frequently are related to money and loneliness.
Yes.
So how do you pay for it? What do you do? How do you sustain yourself, right? So that's where the intentionality came in. And quite frankly, making a dream come true, such as exploring the world long term, is no different than you deciding that you want to buy a new car or you want to buy a house.
Mhm.
You decide that that is important to you and that is a priority, and the decisions you make are related to making that thing a priority. So you
Yeah.
can
Thank
save
you
for
for
it. You may
grounding
decide to
that.
take in a roommate. You
Yeah.
may, get a second job. You may get a side hustle going. I mean, all of these things, like any dream that you have, you can make it happen with some thoughtful planning and orchestration and support. So that's really how it moved forward, was thinking, one, this is the big, hairy, audacious goal that I have, or the big dream. And then, okay, well, let's look to see, well, what would it take? And there were milestones along the way, right? So it wasn't like I
Mhm.
had this thing that felt so unattainable. Maybe it's, we look at going from step 1 to step 7 and we forget about all the steps in the middle, and you just keep moving along. It doesn't always happen overnight. It takes a little bit of time, but yeah, it's like once you make any of those big decisions, you start planning and preparing for it, but you have to keep your mind um, focused on it, and not in an all-consuming way, but I think in a realistic way. Because what I think does also happen is people can get discouraged. They feel like they're missing out on things or whatever. And that's why I think the reality component comes in. Like, you have this dream, but don't compromise, at least for me. I didn't want to compromise anything else that I was doing. I still wanted to hang out with my friends. I still wanted to do this, but I also had this priority. So it just, some smart decisions is what it really boils down to, which is no different than people making smart decisions as it relates to that car they want to buy outright, or the dream vacation that they want to have.
I feel like I have this conversation a lot in content creation. Like,
I, I'm sure you do. I can see the parallels with that.
I don't have followers. It's not working. How long you been doing it? 2 weeks. Like,
Exactly.
like, it takes a bit more time.
And it gets adjusted along the way, right? You learn more about, oh, well, I might want to do that. Well, that might add an expense to your, overall plan here. So you adjust accordingly.
Yeah.
But the
I think the
biggest thing was the
difference here
imagination.
I think the difference here for most people, because you're right, I like that you're grounding it in things that, you know, we're doing already, right? But I think for most people, this is something that you haven't really seen people do, particularly, right, like in your circle.
You haven't
And
seen
you know,
Black people do. Let's correct that.
well,
Let's just be real.
so it kind of seems like, you know, crazy, right? Like it's
Oh
not
yeah.
like, oh,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
just buying a car. Well, everybody buys a car, or everybody gets a new home, or everybody, you know, leaves a job maybe and gets another job or something. But everybody don't just say, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm out. Ha, my shirt. People don't, you know, everybody doesn't do that. So I think, you know, a lot of it comes from not really having that support or not really seeing someone else do it to know that it's really possible.
But I think it's also a shift in just how I'm going to use this word, but not, I don't necessarily want to use this word. I want to use something else, but it's the only word that's popping into my mind. Evolved, right? Like how we've changed and how things have just changed to where we are able to see a lot more than what we were able to see before. Because I don't think that this is something that is like brand new. I'm sure there were Black women that were leaving in the 70s and the 60s and everything else, right? But we didn't have access to technology to see all of that, right?
Right.
Like, were they taking a Polaroid camera with them and then pulling out just those little, you know, pictures? Yeah, that's not going to spread that far. But now, since we have all of this technology and we're able to see folks who are in different countries, and I think, did I post it on our Facebook page yet? But anyway, I'll post on our Facebook page this gal that's like on the trunk of an elephant and like, you know, going up and down, and people are like, I can't do that. Oh my gosh, she on that elephant. You know, well, I'm looking at it like, oh my gosh, I want to go get on an elephant.
And that's where the imagination comes in, because
right?
if we think about our ancestors, if we think about our grandmothers, you know, the people who came before us, they didn't always have they weren't necessarily given latitude to dream, because just the realities from a
That part.
social and economic context made it really, really difficult. But why not? And that was one of the things for me. You know, we didn't talk about yet the fact that there was a pandemic underway and early in the pandemic. But when we step back and think about the why nots, like if I couldn't think of a good enough reason to not take my break.
And
And
so what was your big
some of
audacious goal? Like when you, because I know you said clarity and it started with that question and imagination, but what actually was the what if?
What was the what if? I think and I would imagine people relate to this because we get in our own way. I mean, we have all seen those situations where we get in our own way and we talk ourselves out of it. But some of it was literally listening and paying attention to the universe was conspiring. And it sometimes, of course, we all joke about how Big Brother is watching us. And so, you know, we mention something and then mention something. And then all of a sudden we start seeing these things pop up in our Instagram feed, and the algorithm is watching us, right? So, but I do think that when I put it out there and I started talking to just a couple of people about it, or I started doing some research on my own, all this information started to flood in my way to me. And I was like, oh, well, wait, let me look at this and let me read about this. And then it became more realistic. It became something that was within reach. And I got excited about it. So that's where the what if happened, is you start trying to get out of your own way. And you reconnect with that child that we have inside of us that said, yes, I want to be, you know, the ballerina, firefighter, teacher, president, you know, that kind of crazy, what seems like absurd. And it may simply be that it may feel absurd if you are in a hard fought leadership position, making good money, and you checked all the boxes, and then you decide that you want to take a cruise around the world for 5 months or something like that, or, you know, whatever your reality is, your tenure track, and you feel as though you really want to do something that's outside of that. What are you compromising? What are you giving up? I've worked so hard to get on tenure track, and will this derail me? And interestingly, I had some of those same thoughts But once I took the break and, the universe continued to support it. One example, so I'm on my break, and at that point I hadn't had any, I wasn't sure how long it was going to be. I was still of the mind that it might be 6 months or so. So, you try to keep your network active, or you might get a contact from a headhunter or something like that. When those opportunities came my way, because I continued to be a little bit tethered, I was still looking at LinkedIn, and I was still kind of staying on top of certain things just because I didn't want to lose connection. When I had some of those exploratory conversations about other opportunities, one, I was surprised that I was still getting outreach. And then two, people wanted to talk more about my break than anything else. And so what you think might be this far-fetched, kind of against the grain notion may be the one thing that really makes you stand out head and shoulders above others, because it's so different, because it's so novel. What I also found was people said to me, "That's my dream. Oh my gosh, you're living my dream."
So was
I feel like every day's my birthday. The birthday mojo? I feel like every day's my birthday.
So was the break, so was it like basically like taking a sabbatical? Like, I'm going to take 6 months off. And I
didn't have to do 6 months. 6 months is what I told myself to make myself feel a little bit more comfortable. But as month 5 came around, I was like, I don't have to stop this. Month 7, no, I think I'm just going to keep going. Month 10, I'm good. And it just kind of went from there.
And so for those who are going to ask, because they are, so how did you support yourself? Like, what did you do? I understand you planned, but what did you do for money, especially since it was longer than you had initially anticipated?
Yeah. So I think some of the things that people should take into account are the type of experience they want to have. So we've seen the extremes. I think for me, the idea of traveling like this, the image that came to mind was a hostel with a backpack and a very, very simplistic experience, right? Like, that's how you can do this. That's how you can balance it. But in reality, there may be opportunities that come your way that are totally unexpected. Sometimes it's friends, where you might end up staying with some friends for a period of time. Sometimes it's exploring the novel. So one of the things that was a significant cost savings for me is sometimes I house sit. Yep. So, and when you house sit, you don't pay for your accommodation. It's an exchange. You're helping a homeowner, and they're, kind of in exchange, you have accommodation for free.
Yep. And we had another.
And then I know of people who've done like work stay programs, or the other homestay type of arrangements, or maybe they're doing some other type of exchange program. So as an example, if people are trying to, again, using the imagination, right? Well, what if I decided to incorporate a work exchange into my visit, my exploration of Europe, or my exploration of North Africa, or whatever it is? Or, well, what if I house sit? Or what if I rent out this spare bedroom in my house to generate additional income to fund my trip? Or maybe I rent out my house or sublet my place while I'm abroad. So again, it's starting to think differently, and those can add up to significant savings or additional revenue generation.
Absolutely. And what did you do? Because I know your home base is St. Louis, and like you said, you kind of extended. So do you still have a place there? Did you kind of sell everything, or?
Yeah, so mine's a little bit convoluted in terms of timing, but so St. Louis is my base now, but I was actually living elsewhere at the start of my break. So when I decided to take my break, I was living in a different city. St. Louis is my hometown, so that's where I go, and where I have a car, and my car is paid off, so it didn't make sense for me to get rid of the car. Car's at my parents' house. My dad drives around the block every once in a while to make sure it still runs. So that was a convenience. So start thinking differently about what base, like people often will lean into maintenance of their existing life when they're taking a leap like this. And that's one of the changes, is that you don't necessarily walk right back into your old life. I had a place I was living in a different city. I put my stuff in storage and took what I needed to my home base, and that's where I go to check in, and I have a storage unit full of other items. And at that time, people were, well, I'm team get rid of everything. I'm team storage unit. People have different opinions about that. But at the time that I started my break, I didn't know how long it was going to go. So I still have my storage unit where my sofas and my beds and my dining table and all that stuff is still located. But again, I thought that it was going to be much shorter. I'm now in the process of purging a lot of items because, unbeknownst to me, this turned into a full-fledged lifestyle.
Them storage unit places, that is a good business because
it is.
Make so much money, but it's real. Like when, an American lifestyle, like you have so much stuff and you can't really see getting rid of your stuff. And so it's like an interim place. Well, let me put it in storage first, which is just kind of working your way up to letting it go.
Well, and I think that's very similar to the job, right? Like you have worked hard, you were probably thoughtful and selective about the acquisition of this dress or these shoes or this purse or whatever. And I will be frank with you, when I came back, I felt like it was so much stuff. And I was sending pictures to my friends. And so one example is I had, I think, 40 pairs of tights. I have 2 legs. Why do I need 40 pairs of tights? So, that was just one thing. I was like, oh my gosh, this feels like so much. And again, thinking back to decisions that people make, why did I decide to buy all that stuff? And now, having lived this lifestyle, I'm like, oh, if I think about what I could have done, how many museum tickets that could have been in, a city abroad, or how many train tickets it could have been. As an example, I went to, just for perspective in terms of expense, the last city I stayed an extended period of time in was Prague. And when I was looking to come back to the US, I said, okay, so let me see. One, I decided I was going to buy a round trip ticket because it was going to make sure that I came back, that I didn't end up staying in the US. But I was like, okay, well, let me look at Berlin. It seems like I could get there relatively easily. The ticket on the train between Berlin and Prague was the equivalent of about $10 US.
Wow.
Exactly. So when I think about all those tights, like that's a pair of tights right there.
That's hilarious.
Tights at Target.
But I think that's real. Like we don't look at that because, $20, $30, whatever, like that's not a big deal. That's not excess. But when you look at it from that standpoint, the experiences that you could have had, no, I think that's a great way of looking at it and a great way of framing it for people. Like we don't think about it like that because everything here is so expensive. It's not going to take $10 to go somewhere.
Yes, and as I mentioned, I'm in DC right now, and I met up with a friend in Georgetown, and I saw, like $14 for a margarita. I was like,
oh yeah,
I'm not accustomed to this. Yeah. But you go to a place like again, Prague. Prague is one of my favorites. Beer is cheaper than water.
That's my crazy. Husband would love it there then.
Crazy. How does that?
That's hilarious.
You think about, yes, we are accustomed, and that's one of the things that people don't realize is once you're there, it's much more, things are so much more within reach. One, simply because of geography, you just don't have as much space between major hubs. And of course, putting things in perspective when it comes to currency. Now that's not always in our favor, but some places I was visiting, it definitely was. I spent a lot of time in England and it's not in favor of the US dollar.
I was about to say England is not, yeah. But the proximity, like you said, is there for sure. Yes. So talk about, because I think this is important too, like how you actually got started, because you started traveling the US first, just getting in your car and road tripping. So talk about that and why you did that.
Yeah. So I've like I mentioned, I've traveled a lot, and I just felt like there was, so you start feeling, I think a lot of us during COVID, we were feeling like the walls were closing in on us a little bit. And I certainly felt that similar tap on my shoulder that I had experienced about go ahead and take the break, just go ahead and take the break, right? It then became go ahead and go. Let's look at how you can do this and mitigate risk and do it safely. So for me, it was solo. For me, it was driving, and then just certainly monitoring what was happening around the country and more broadly, even around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really where my mind shift had gone, where I said, okay, how might we? What would it look like if I started to do X? And my first experience was doing a house sit.
In the US.
Mm-hmm. So I've house sat in the US and I've house sat internationally.
So,
And so, hotels were tricky, and you could then have that conversation. You're building a relationship with someone, within the confines of this exchange. And that's really where it began. And it was me opening up a map and saying, okay, what is within my path? Where can I stop along the way? How long do I want this journey to be? So, so my first stop, my first stay with this nomadic living experience was Arizona. So I went to Arizona.
Love it.
And I mapped it out, and I knew when I was going to stop. And, you are mindful about your protocols. So you make sure you got your wipes and your mask and your sanitizer and all of those other things. And I don't want to overlook the realities of, there was a lot of debate in the travel community about movement.
Yes.
Right.
COVID,
and some people have very strong opinions about that. But I also think that I don't want to I want to underscore the importance of mitigating risk and making sure you're doing things with your eyes open, because that was something that some people did very well and some people didn't do as well, as we saw in the news. But I think just keeping that top of mind was important.
No, it was so interesting, and I tell people, and you're right, there was a whole debate about traveling, and particularly during COVID, and the risk and everything that was happening. I didn't travel more, but that was like some of the best travel experiences during COVID. You drove, but flying, there was like nobody on the planes.
Yeah.
And it was so cheap. Oh my, it was the best time to travel. And I was like I took that as an opportunity, like, well, where can I go that I haven't been yet in the US? Because a lot of times we don't think about that. We do think internationally, like all the places that we want to go, but we don't look at like, wow, I'm from here. I was born here, but there's so many states that I haven't been to, and there's so many different cultures and experiences within these different states.
Well, and then, part of me, like, it's ours. This is our country. These places and spaces are available to us as they are available to anyone who is here. And that was a motivator. It was how can I be curious? And so, I think sometimes one thing I will say, and I'm so grateful for this, is my tribe, my family, my circle of friends, my community of people, I met no resistance. I met tremendous support in ways that was unexpected. And I know from being part of travel blogs and different groups, Facebook groups and different communities and whatnot, that people really do meet some resistance. Yeah. I did not experience that at all. I did not experience at all. It was, there was a level of excitement that I didn't expect. And almost as much as I might have had FOMO at one point or another, they were like, you are living my dream. I can't believe you're doing this. I think this is so awesome.
Yeah. And I'm gonna live vicariously through you.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a motivator for me too, was how can I, one, show people that this is possible? Yeah. How can I, in some ways, reclaim or claim my place in space in this country, and places, and let other people know that they can do it too. And also for the people who are there that are perhaps not expecting someone with my profile to walk in, that I am as interested in it as they are. And the reason I mention that is because some of the places I went, so one of my most impactful US based experiences was I drove, not all of it, but a good portion of the Harriet Tubman Byway, which is in Dorchester County, Maryland, and it goes all the way to Pennsylvania. So I think it stops in Philadelphia. But like I felt the spirit of Harriet Tubman. I went to plantation homes. I went to museums. I remember I went to a whistle factory that was like literally making whistles. So just stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think about. I was able to go to Black Wall Street in Tulsa. And when I've traveled, whether it was here in the US or abroad, there were two things that drew me to a place, or at least that I sought within a place. I wanted to see myself in it. So I wanted to understand or connect with the Black experience in some of those communities, and not necessarily in a uber deep, heavy way, but it was more like I wanted to connect with it, that I saw myself, that I could see my ancestors, that I could, see myself in those in those spaces. And then women. So the history of, often women's history is so not necessarily the dominant message that's being shared. And these women were of different backgrounds, but it was more that they were just fellow women navigating their world at the time. So those were two elements that I sought in different cities. Some places it was easier to do than others, but that really led me to some of these really exciting and unique experiences. So I went to 3 different plantation homes when I was in Tennessee. I went to Tombstone when I was in Arizona. I mentioned the Harriet Tubman Byway. I went to the Cowboy Museum in Oklahoma. I went to, one of my favorites was in Diamond, Missouri, which is, there's a national park there for George Washington Carver.
Wow, I did
Yeah.
not.
I went to Crystal Bridges in Arkansas, which is a beautiful museum that is tied to the Walmart family. It was a phenomenally gorgeous place. Like, it just takes your breath away because it's so beautiful there. And it's a museum. I'm a bit of a museum nerd. Museums and libraries, that was my jam.
Love it. How many states have you been to?
I think my count is 43. I've been to 43 states and I think 37 countries.
Wow. And so in the US, where's your favorite place?
Oh, oof. It's hard to choose.
I know. If it's more than
no
one,
one ever asked me what's my favorite state, so I don't know that I've even thought about it. I mean, there's so many places,
because we don't ask
that.
That. Like, we kind of lump it all together. And I know from being in different places, it's definitely different. I'm here like you in the DC area, and I was in Vegas last year for 6 months. Totally different experience.
Yes. Oh, I don't know. I don't think I can choose. I mean, I try. One of the things that I found abroad is that people are so curious about the US. And I'm like, okay, so just for perspective, if you go from New York to LA, you were on the airplane for almost 7 hours. Mm-hmm. If you fly from New York or from the East Coast to London, you're on the plane for almost 9 hours. So you're almost like, you went over an entire ocean. So it's so hard to choose. I think it's more about special places, but I also think that the places, the cities themselves may resonate differently. What would have been my favorite place 5 years ago may not be my favorite now because of context, right? Time, place, space, what's happening in the world where I am on my life journey will shape or be impacted by my surroundings. So I feel like that's an unfair question.
We could talk about what it is right now. They don't
know. Is there a place I'm excited to get to or be in? So I will say I was walking. So it's been a little while since I've been in DC. Coincidentally, when I was last in DC, it was the day of the insurrection. And I'm here now. So there was something very comforting and familiar. And I used to live in DC at one point. So there was something very familiar and comforting that I really appreciated and enjoyed about being in DC, because I feel like it's, we're very imperfect, but it represents promise to me. And so walking the streets and seeing the monuments and the history and being able to touch it and be surrounded by it, even though we're in a difficult place, especially in the US, I remain hopeful when I look at some of these institutional, representations of dreams. So that surprised me. I was walking down, met a friend over near DuPont Circle, and you're walking, you see the different embassies and these different like it just makes you think, oh, I've been to that country, or you see different things, and you look up and you see the Washington Monument. And then the other day I was driving along the going into Virginia. I was on the 14th Street Bridge, and you're driving and you see the Capitol building on one side, you see the monument, and then behind you is the White House, and it's like this is very exciting. So yeah, I guess DC for right now.
I love this area
because of that.
Even though it is crazy expensive and it's always changing, I love this area. And it was funny.
True.
When I was in Vegas, I had an amazing experience that I did travel around. I didn't get to Utah like I wanted to, but I did travel around. And it was so different and so much slower, and I appreciated that. There was like no traffic, but then I came here, the traffic is hell. I mean, it was just ridiculous, but I was like, I miss all this Blackness. Oh, there's so much to do. There is always so much to do.
To that point, for me, I missed what I shouldn't even say I missed, what I appreciated. I felt a little warm fuzzy as I was walking down the street and I saw so many different people.
Yeah.
It was, certainly I'm seeing Black, I'm seeing brown, I'm seeing, everybody, but I saw people coming out of the Colombian embassy. I saw, just different styles of dress. I saw like everyone was very much, from my observation as I'm just walking, it's like everybody was authentic, the representing themselves in their community, which I really valued.
Love that. So for you now, so what's next? So how long has your break been now?
My last day of work was May 15th, 2020.
Wow. Well, there you go. 6 months turned into almost 2 years.
And going on 3 at this point too. It's kind of crazy as I sit back and we're closing out 2022. So what has happened and how this has started to become a lifestyle is, again, the imagination and also opportunity. So I had been I've been asked to help out with a couple of consulting projects. And so it's become a thing. And that allows me to be location independent and be selective about what I want to do and what type of project I'd want to get myself involved with and when and if. So that is, from a professional perspective, that was a way that I felt like I kept myself sharp and aware, because when I was on break, I think a lot of us who've been working for a couple of decades and have, climbed the ladder and done all of these things, when we have complete control of our schedule, and when someone says, well, what do you do? And you can honestly say whatever I want, as freeing as that is, it's a little bit frightening too, because I found myself pulling for structure. I liked, I had been doing it all my adult life, right? Probably all my life in general. And so to not have structure or to be in complete control of the degree of structure that I had, it was a little nerve-wracking. So I appreciate what consulting offers in terms of a little bit of structure and something to work on and to keep me sharp, and even relationships and networking and the things that also come along with that. So I'll continue to do that. And then I'll continue to travel and share my story, and um, getting more and more into blogging and posting on social and doing those things. And I've had several people reach out to me to see if I could help them. So that is turning into something too. So I'm definitely open for those types of conversations to help advise people on how they might be able to explore the options when it comes to taking a similar leap. So I'm going to just continue, I shouldn't say just, but I will continue to do what I'm doing, which is I have found, I don't believe in the idea of work-life balance. I think that there's an integration, because once years ago, when people started getting Blackberries, I felt like that concept just went out the window because we were just available, right? So I feel as though I have really begun to figure out what that integration could look like for where I am right now.
Yeah.
And I'll just keep refining and enjoying and exploring. I've had such tremendous experiences abroad. My mind has been open in ways that were totally unexpected, and I had so much fun. I met wonderful, wonderful people, and I realized that though this seems very novel and far-fetched and a departure from what we were supposed to do, there are a lot of other people who are on a similar path, and we find one another. And
I'm glad you said that, because you mentioned finances, right? And then loneliness. And so I was going to ask you about that. So how have you been able to, combat loneliness, or how have you found community?
Absolutely. Honest to goodness truth, I never felt lonely the entire time.
Wow.
Not once.
Do you have siblings?
I do.
Okay.
But I never felt lonely. And that I didn't realize how much of a big deal that was until I realized like the loneliness piece, or the idea, or the possibility of being lonely is such a deterrent for people. It was just never an issue. One, I enjoy my own company. I think I'm fun, and I like to do cool stuff. So I was always able to keep myself engaged. In fact, what is often the case is I do too much. I am too social, or I'm too much of something, too active, too curious, right? So I'm going out and oh, that exhibit looks really good, or oh, that looks like a really fun thing to do. So that has kept the lonelies away. But to more specifically answer your question about finding community, I do think that, and actually before I get into that, I do want to make a distinction. There is a difference between being on vacation and living abroad. So I don't feel and I'm a slow traveler. So I'm not one who goes in and I got to do everything in these 3 days that I'm here in, insert country. I leave myself open to subject myself to whim. And I don't feel like I need to do something every single day. Sometimes I do, but I don't feel as though I have to. It's not necessarily by design. My intent is to slowly enjoy and experience and immerse. So when I go to a city, I often will invest in that one city, which allows me to get to know it well, and also allows me to meet people and connect with people and build some of those deeper relationships. Because when you're moving like this by yourself, it feels like you're driving a stick for the first time. You start, stop, stall, roll backwards, get going again, and that is a big consideration, is the loneliness and how you create community. So that's a long answer to part of your question, but more specifically, the tactics I utilize are, there's a very active nomad community in Facebook. There are active expat communities in Facebook, Meetup, and lots of travel groups.
People still do Meetup? I said, people still do Meetup?
Absolutely. Internationally, it's very popular.
Wow.
And Facebook, like people say the same thing about Facebook, right?
Facebook,
and then
I know.
I don't, I also will reach out to people and meet up with them for coffee, which is something that is not, I feel like it's a little bit more popular outside of the US. People feel as though you're being like they might be a little bit more suspicious and hesitant here. I also think we're a little bit more guarded. We're
Mhm.
open and friendly, but at the same time, there are things where we're cautious in ways that other people aren't. So from a relationship perspective, there are times where I've connected with people over social, and we end up meeting for coffee. Like, oh, well, you're in, especially when you're traveling, when you are
Yes.
moving from, people are willing to connect. So I utilize online communities, which I know has its own, like, I don't know, you find like-minded folks because you're
Absolutely.
moving around. So that's one space. Introductions from other friends.
Okay.
So that's always nice because you kind of have somebody who's vetted.
Yep.
So that happens a fair amount. And then I will engage in conversation. So sometimes you just talk to people. Sometimes they talk to me. And you can, keep your spidey sense active to see if that person's crazy or not. But I have found that as, the old fashioned way of just meeting people. It
How
still
about that?
works.
How about that? No, I'm glad you said it, because Jessica and I talk about that all the time, like taking those online relationships offline. Like, we met online.
Uh-huh.
And we didn't meet in person until like years after we actually met online, but fostered that relationship, and so many other relationships like that, that I met on different platforms years ago. And I remember I developed a lot of relationships with people out in LA and California. So when I went there, I actually met them at the first time. This was like maybe 3 or 4 years after I actually met them online. And it was like the most awesome time I had, because all these people that I had to connect with that I met online. So it was a very different experience, like you said, than just kind of like just going on vacation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because with when you're living, I need to find the grocery store. I need to figure out laundry. I need to figure out, well, I sometimes need to figure out laundry. General, like I actually have criteria for a place where I'm staying so
Okay.
that it makes my life easier. But I've got to figure out the recycling schedule and take out the trash and do some dishes and all the things you do when you're living, which is just, you don't have to deal with that stuff when you're on vacation.
Yeah.
Most of the time, you're often in a hotel, or even if you're at an Airbnb, you may not be there for an extended period of time. You have to worry about stuff like that. I often need to be mindful of, so safety is definitely a consideration. So you want to know, as one example is that I wanted to know what accessing local services looked like. So you may have considerations. What is the police system, which is stuff that you get from some of the travel groups because other people have walked in those shoes. So some of those questions can get addressed too. So yeah, you need to learn the community in a way that's a little bit different. What day is the market day? Does everybody get their fresh vegetables at the market as opposed to the grocery store? Are there religious holidays? Google has a calendar function where you can load the holidays of a particular country onto your Google Calendar. So that's one of the things I change when I update my time zone, is the calendar for the community in which I'm staying, because I need to know if I'm in a Muslim country, what are some of the holy days that I need to be sensitive to. Just, I can't go to the museum that day, or these places, the grocery stores are closed, and you better get your groceries because this festival runs 3 days in the city. So there are things like that that come into account when you're living. And then certainly transit is a consideration.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's a great tip. I don't think that most people think about that. The calendar. I love that. Because you're right. Like there are so many differences, and different holidays. I have clients that are international, and I'm like, oh, Thanksgiving. They're like, we don't get Thanksgiving.
Right.
But we get this holiday over here. And so yeah, it does differ. Now, how long are you staying, like typically? Because I'm sure it changes. How long are you typically staying in a place?
I really like the rhythm of about 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
And I don't mind going back to places. And what is something that, depending on your country, you need to be mindful of as it relates to visa regulations. So here are a couple of quick examples. In the UK, my limit was roughly 6 months there. So you needed to be mindful of how many days you're in the country. If you're in Europe, there is a subset of EU countries that subscribe to what's basically known as the Schengen zone. And the Schengen zone, there are lots of rules and kind of terms within being a part of the Schengen country unit. But one is that it allows you to move from country to country as though we move from state to state.
Got it.
So it treats a lot of access as domestic, but you as a non-EU citizen have limitations on how long you can stay. So it's 90 days within 180, and that 180 days is rolling. So you have to be mindful of that. So 4 to 6 weeks is a good comfort zone for me, because it helps me mitigate against being in violation from a visa perspective. Another example is the UAE. So the United Arab Emirates, you can say, well, and I'm saying this from the American perspective, so I just want to caveat that 30 days. And then it's understood practice that you get up to 10 days grace period after that 30 days. Okay. So you need to know what's going on in the country that you'd like to visit. And I use, there's an app that you can download to help you track your Schengen days, because people make it seem like it's really easy, but it's not. It's complicated. So you.
I was about to say, and these are all these little caveats that most people, we don't think about. Because again, if you're on vacation, you go for a week or two and then you're out. So you're not thinking about these things. Yes.
Yeah. And then certain, especially during COVID, you saw practices becoming more and more frequent around nomad. So there are regulations related to work and the type of work that you're able to do. So those are considerations to take into account too. So I guess the moral of the story around that is make sure you utilize the information available to you about what the rules are in that country. And it will vary. I think a good starting place is the State Department. Because they have information pages for every country, and it can help at least get you toward legitimate sources for information. And then you supplement that with what you find in the travel blogs and word of mouth and other things, because you really want to be aware of what the actual laws are in different countries. You can find a wealth of resources there. Safety being a concern. Along the same lines, one thing I would also advocate for is that people register through the STEP program. I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but in the event that something goes down, the State Department then knows that you're there. And people have concerns about Big Brother watching, but think about, there was a bombing in Turkey a couple of weeks ago. If you needed to get evacuated or you needed to get to the embassy, they at least know that you're in country. So, I mean, that probably could be a whole episode in itself, but
that's a great
there are things to take into account when you're moving freely.
Oh, you've said so much in this interview. I was like, wow. There's a lot of things to consider.
Right?
And it can be done though, right? The biggest
I was about to say some people will get bogged down on that and feel like, oh, this is too much.
And it's not. It really isn't. And that's where I think also vacation versus living comes in. The same way you would need to think through what it means to move from Chicago to Atlanta, it's really no different than that. You're just dealing with perhaps a different set of rules. But I don't want people to think that it's overwhelming and it's inaccessible to them, because if anything, the experiences and the expansion that you have in mind, body, spirit is so worth anything that you may currently view as a hurdle. It may feel like a hurdle simply because you don't know it.
I was just going to say, kind of as we close out, for some reason in my mind, I keep hearing Nadia's leggings or Nadia's that just rings. Like that whole thing of like, wow, $10, like one pair of leggings. Wow. Um, but as we kind of close this out, we've heard from a lot of our other speakers and our other guests that they just felt like they could just be free, and that experience just opened up, a lot of things that they felt like they had been, suppressing. So did you have that similar type of experience? Like, was there anything that just went, oh, all of a sudden? I mean, I kind of feel like there was. I mean, the fact that you've been gone this long, there was, but I would like for
Right. She didn't go back.
Like an awakening of some sort. So I think, was there a specific moment? I don't think there was, because I've had such wonderful things. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. So one, an example of me giving into curiosity. I mentioned I love, museums and libraries and things like that, but it's because of the history and the stories, right? When I was in Prague for the first time, Prague is such a beautiful city. I call it 360 degrees of beauty, because you're just, any way you turn is beautiful. I went to the workshop of a master violin maker, and he walked me through the process for taking a block of wood and turning it into an instrument. That was magical. I went to a village in Turkey and sat side by side with a woman who taught me how to weave. I sat with her for 4 hours. My hands were sore, my back was tender, and it made me think differently about women's labor and work and unpaid work and paid work and what that means, while creating something. Right. When I was in Tennessee, I went to a plantation home, and I saw there was a smokehouse, and the bricks of the smokehouse were made by hand. And usually when you put it into the little mold, it gets completely smoothed out. There was a handprint that remained in one of the bricks. So I could put my hand in this enslaved workers' handprint, right? So some of it is opening yourself up for these unique experiences and thinking much more about the people. It was, for me, context was so important. And I think we overlook context, what's happening in the world, what was happening at that person's time, how much effort and labor and expertise went into the creation of these objects that we simply see in a museum. One of my favorite experiences, and I talk about this one a lot, was I had gone to The Hague. I was in the Netherlands, and I went to a museum. I think it's called Mauritshuis Museum. And it was at one time a mansion, a private home. The man who owned it was he owned sugar plantations. And to think that this museum that was one, and how the money came to be, now houses a Rembrandt of two, I think the title is Two African Men. I've seen different interpretations, but they're on the walls in this gallery that has this emerald green damask fabric looking wallpaper. And that there is this beautiful, delicately done portrait that Rembrandt made of these two Black men who, it is believed, lived in the same neighborhood as Rembrandt. So you think about the stories and the people, and it makes you feel small and large at the same time.
Yeah.
And that is so enriching and impactful, and it can change you.
Yeah.
So to answer your question about a singular moment, no, I think it was this collection of moments like the ones that I described, which are big in themselves, that makes me want to just keep going back over and over again and seeing more and doing more. I'm not the one who's going to be on the adventure trip. I'm not the one that's going to be like, I need to go jump off this bridge, and that's not going to be me. But I want to take in the beauty. I want to touch. I want to feel. I want to taste the food, the culture, all of that. And I think one of the things that it really one of the things I appreciate most is how much we're united in our humanity. And I get that when I think about the monks who painted the pages in these books from the 13th century, or when I see Jane Austen's writing desk at the British Library. I even went to the Jane Austen Festival in Bath, England.
I'm
So it's like Bridgerton come to life. So.
Like, you've been doing things that people don't even know exist, which is
and that's because I leaned into the curiosity, and that's what I want people to know is available to them. Like, right now there's talk about Harry and Meghan's show. I was in London. I went to London 4 times over the year, but I was there for the Jubilee. I was there. I was at Windsor the week before Queen Elizabeth died. I was there for the funeral, and to see the continuity of all of that. So people often would have seen one of those things, but because I had the freedom of my schedule and I had the curiosity to go, and I allowed myself to be at to take a front seat for history. I didn't, definitely some people are like, I wouldn't go there and support them and all that other stuff. It's more like you want to be there for it. You want to see these things unfold, to see the thread. Most people are seeing a stitch.
Yeah.
I'm seeing the whole thread.
I love it. I love it.
And I want other people to know that that's available to them too.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, ultimately what it is, it's like you said, your jam is museums and libraries, where others are like, I don't want to do that. I want to eat, or, like you said, I want, different adventure, or I want to go club hopping, or whatever it might be. But ultimately what it is living life on your own terms. And like you said, having the freedom
Absolutely.
to do that and to carve that out and say, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it.
Yes. The sense of agency. If you think about like a Harriet Tubman, like what I'm doing is a physical representation of what she wanted. Agency, the ability to make my choices, to move around, to have control of my life on my terms.
Yes, that's actual freedom.
How about that? That is freedom.
How about that? Well, thank you so much for sharing this. Like Jessica said, like, you shared a lot. You gave some really powerful tips. I hope that you all watching, I hope this has helped you on your journey, however that might look. You probably going to want to watch this again, because there's a lot of good information here that she's sharing that you want to go investigate. But this has been a great episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in and watching. Thank you all, Nadia, for sharing. And Jessica, you got anything to say?
You all for watching once again, and make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching. If you're listening, make sure you go ahead and leave us a review. Let us know what you loved about this episode. Take a screenshot and tag us at Black Women Leave America on Instagram, Facebook, and all of the other places and spaces. And if you're watching this on TikTok, make sure that you duet this. All right, talk to y'all soon. We'll see you all in the next episode.
All right. Thank you.